Welcome to the Untold Tales audio anthologies. Written by Dr. Jeffrey A. Robinson and narrated by Melissa Del Toro Schaffner. A little knowledge. The theft of the alien spaceship from its special hangar at Andrews Air Force Base went off without any complications. A dozen men silently approached the ship and set up a large device about 20 feet from the slender interstellar craft. They stepped back, and the device generated a brief, soundless flash of light that left a strong odor of ozone hanging in the air. The brief but intense burst of focused gamma radiation disabled the metallo-organic security systems of the vessel. The accompanying electromagnetic pulse fused the onboard systems and rendered them inert, without harming the team's own electronics. Some of the scientists who developed the device had worried that the complexity of the neural circuitry on the alien ship meant that the act of deactivating it was tantamount to murder. At the instant the ship's systems were destroyed, a special computer-controlled communication program in the replacement mock-up craft began transmitting signals to simulate the electromagnetic signature of the now immobilized craft. John Martin watched his team as they silently loaded the alien craft into the specially shielded truck they'd driven right into the hangar. A second team moved the decoy into position and positioned it precisely where the original had been. When it was positioned properly, the two teams hurried back to their vehicles. The security guards on duty in the hangar were part of John's clandestine team. Unless others became suspicious, they would rotate the new billets at the end of the week, and no one would know that the real spaceship had been switched with a nearly identical imitation. As the small convoy left the hangar, facility's internal security fields, sensors, and cameras were reactivated, and the dozen members of Martin's technical assault team disappeared into the night. John rode nervously as the trucks approached the base's security station at the perimeter fence. He stared nonchalantly to one side as the driver presented the falsified orders to the officer at the gate. Everything seemed to be in order, so the guards waved the two trucks through. As planned, the spacecraft theft had only taken 18 minutes. It was hard to believe the abduction was the result of more than a decade of planning. Millions of dollars had been spent just to design and build the special gamma-ray EMP generator. It had taken several more years to create the electronics that imitated the ship's electromagnetic signature. After John Martin and his team were well away from the base, the two trucks split up. John and the first team proceeded to the ops center where the real work would begin. The other took the rest of the team back to the facility where they had trained for this exercise. Their task was now to destroy all evidence of their work. As John's team turned onto the main highway, he broke radio silence to report his status on his scrambled comlink.
"Ops, this is John,"
he said.
"Do you copy?" "Yes, John, I'm here,"
came the curt reply. Winston Price was security chief at the research base, where he was waiting to receive the stolen alien technology.
"The snatch is complete,"
John said.
"Has there been any indication that the switch has been detected yet?" "No, John. No security alerts have been posted. Our observers don't report any alarms on base. Everything is quiet." "Roger,"
replied John, relaxing a bit.
"We're en route to the facility now. Notify the research team to stand by, and have someone call General Stanbrook that Phase 1 was successful. He's already here and waiting,"
came the reply.
"He's in the main conference room with the lab director waiting for your arrival." "Copy that,"
he said.
"Our ETA is 40 minutes.
John terminated the radio transmission and looked outside the truck's windows at the clear, moonless Virginia sky. The late commuter traffic that hurried along the road was oblivious to the secret cargo that joined them on the highway. The cars thinned as they got further from Washington, and soon John and his team had the road to themselves. As the lights of the city dimmed in the distance, there was little to watch except the star-filled sky and the distant military helicopter that paralleled their course along the highway. As planned, there was no one to notice them when they finally pulled into a long-abandoned tire plant near the small town of Warrenton, Virginia. John supervised the unloading of the narrow 30-foot-long spaceship. It had barely fit into the largest 18-wheeler they could comfortably handle on open roads. With a little luck, no one would remember one unmarked truck on a dark winter night. When the cargo was unloaded and on its way down the elevator to the secret labs far below ground, he hurried to join General Stanbrook. After a long descent in another high-speed elevator, Colonel John Martin stepped into a small alcove at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor. Waving his badge at the security team stationed there, he strode down the long hallway and entered the conference room at the far end. He saluted the general smartly, but Stanbrook ignored the gesture and simply stared out the window at the far end of the room that overlooked the huge underground lab that was receiving the stolen ship. John approached and watched as teams of scientists and technicians began to swarm over the stolen ship like a hive of curious ants. The general looked nervous despite the evening's successes so far. "How long do you figure we've got before they realize it's gone?" the general asked without turning. 1, maybe 2 weeks, John said. "The aliens have been coming to Earth for 20 years, and they've come to take their security for granted. After all, there have never been any attempts to even approach one of their ships before. They're quite confident their security systems are more than adequate to keep their ships safe, while they visit Earth. Although some visitors stay close to their ships, the 2 Kriata who use this craft have been known to stay away for as long as a month." General Stanbrook nodded silently. The small talk revealed his underlying nervousness. All this had been discussed before. John understood his apprehension. They were all taking a big risk. "You know," the general said, "I never really bought into this whole project, but I have to admit, you've done a remarkable job, John." John felt a wave of pride sweep over him. The general was normally reticent and didn't give out compliments freely. "Honestly," said Stanbrook, "I never thought we'd get this far." As he continued to stare at the strange silver craft, he added, "I always figured the aliens would catch us before we got the ship halfway into the lab." "That credit has to go to Dr. Davidson," John said. "He's the one who managed to crack the secrets to the Kree computer technologies. He took 3 years just analyzing the communicator that their first ambassador somehow lost. Actually, one of our best agents stole it," John added silently to himself. Although Davidson never broke their security codes, he did figure out a way to disable the circuitry that's grown into their devices. At the mention of the doctor's name, the general looked at the giant lab below and watched as the frenetic white-haired scientist, Dr. Winston Davidson, stood on a platform and shouted, directing a dozen different activities. Phase 1 was complete with the abduction of the vessel. The research director's next objective was to actually open up the spaceship. That was Phase 2. Phase 3 would begin as soon as they got inside. The general straightened and faced John. "In any event, it's taken more than 2 years and over $500 million just to build the device that fried their ship's systems. So where's the payoff?" He gestured with empty hands. "We end up with a stolen ship that can't fly and which we may not even be able to get into. Then, even if we do, all we have is fantastic technology that's no longer guaranteed to work. Finally, when the theft is eventually discovered, we face the possible enmity of an extraterrestrial civilization that's thousands of years more advanced than we are." The general lowered his hands and clasped them behind his back. "I still think it's a losing situation." But it's not," insisted John. The general gritted his teeth and waited, as if hoping John could convince him once and for all. "The planners at the Pentagon worked out all the scenarios. Even if we can't get inside and don't learn anything from the power systems inside, we won't lose anything. As a race, the Kriata have very strict rules about interfering with younger cultures. They've never displayed any warlike tendencies. Even when the Arab states launched missiles at them, they simply disabled the weapons and ignored the attack. Most experts think their ships only have defensive capabilities and don't have any offensive weapons at all." If we can glean anything from their power systems, it's pure benefit to scientific research. After we're through, we'll just blame the theft on Arab terrorists and things will return to normal." The general looked unconvinced. "Look, sir, even if they all decide to pack up and leave, what do we lose?" John asked. The general nodded silently. When the aliens had appeared 20 years before, their arrival had caused a frenzy of different responses. Many people panicked. Some predicted doom. Others embraced the extraterrestrials as saviors. After months of emotional overreaction by most of humanity, the aliens slowly began visiting different countries and cities around the world. It hadn't mattered what anyone's expectations were. Everyone was eventually disappointed. The aliens came and observed, but limited their interactions with humans, claiming they weren't allowed to interfere. They simply came and visited. They partook of all the luxuries mankind offered, but they never gave back anything in return. They wouldn't answer questions about their race or their civilization. They never even spoke in their own languages. The aliens demonstrated remarkable linguistic skills and spoke human languages with perfect fluency. After more than 2 decades, they'd offered no tidbits of knowledge. They neither advised nor explained. They offered no gifts of knowledge, nor even explanations about their purpose for coming here. For 20 years, they'd visited Earth in their tiny interstellar ships and simply watched. They arrived, observed, and traveled about as if the Earth were a vacation resort. The world press had come to refer to them simply as the visitors, since they only stayed for short periods each time they went somewhere. The aliens always traveled in groups of 2 or 4. They never went anywhere alone. While they were no longer feared as monsters or revered as saviors, the aliens remained incredibly popular with the general population. They were invited everywhere and seemed to enjoy all of the attention humans gave them. However, mankind never received anything in return. Nonetheless, their alien technology continued to fascinate mankind. This effort to steal and study one of their ships had been initiated more than 10 years before, when the president's science advisor became convinced that they would never learn anything from the visitors through any other means. Subtler approaches had failed. When asked questions, the aliens responded that mankind wasn't ready for such knowledge yet. Once, the highest-ranking members of their contingent, their first ambassador, had casually remarked that even the tiniest gifts of knowledge could have disastrous results. If nothing else, they were consistent. They revealed nothing of themselves, much to the frustration of every government official and scientist on the planet. "Do you really think that this is our last resort?" asked the general. "Wouldn't patience be more prudent?" John shrugged. "It's not my call, sir. We've waited 20 years and aren't any closer to getting our questions answered now than when they first made contact." The general started to say something more when the conference room intercom buzzer sounded. "General, Dr. Davidson in the lab is calling you," said a voice on the speaker. The general turned and looked out the window. The research director stood proudly on the platform. When he made eye contact with the general, he simply pointed at the ship. "Damn," said the general. "I don't know how he did it, but he actually got the damned thing open." John approached the windows and looked down. Where a smooth, seamless hull had been, there was now a hole in the side of the ship. Even with the ship's circuitry fused, Davidson had somehow coaxed the alien craft to open itself. The general nodded at the research director and Davidson, descended the steps of the platform, and walked over to the alien ship. Ducking slightly, he disappeared inside. Now, Phase 3 began. A week and a half went by without incident. Analysis of the ship's power generator and engines proceeded on schedule. Then, 12 days after the abduction, Davidson and Colonel John Martin were summoned to the main conference room. When John arrived, the general was shouting, "I don't care if your research data isn't complete yet. I want a full status report now!" The general banged his open palm on the large conference table, and the white-haired scientist jumped back in shock. John saluted smartly and said, "Sir, you sent for me?" The general's face was red, but he turned to John and said, "Yes, Colonel. Shit's just hit the fan. About 20 minutes ago, the 2 aliens we've been monitoring on their visit to New York City abruptly left their Manhattan penthouse accommodations and boarded military vertical takeoff whisper jets to return to the ship they parked at Andrews Air Force Base. When they were in transit, they informed the flight crew on the jet that something was wrong. We think the aliens must have tried to communicate with their ship. Base personnel at Andrews are standing by, but they don't know what's happened yet. Within 10 minutes, it will become very obvious that the alien ship has been replaced with a decoy. I was just trying to encourage Dr. Davidson to deliver an immediate update on his work so far. If this facility isn't as thoroughly shielded as you think, the aliens could be here in less than an hour to reclaim their ship. I'm prepared to evacuate the lab, and I've ordered that all research data collected so far be secured. Despite what the experts on the President's Science Council say, I consider the alien response unpredictable and will abandon this facility if they make any move to approach it." He turned and glared at Davidson. "I don't know about the aliens, but if I landed on a planet of talking monkeys, I'd fry any of them that tried to steal, let alone wreck, the spaceship I came in." Dr. Davidson gulped and started to speak. As I was trying to say, our findings aren't complete, but we have confirmed that the ship's power source is based on a charged singularity of an unusual type. We think it's a Kern singularity. That's a highly charged black hole that's spinning rapidly. It's surprisingly small and must have been artificially created, since black holes that small should quickly evaporate by accelerated Hawking radiation. The singularity generates a powerful electric field. The ship's containment systems are of a failsafe type. The energy to contain the black hole is drawn from the singularity itself. Unless the entire system is destroyed catastrophically, the field can't fail as long as the singularity exists. Davidson smiled. "That means it's completely safe, sir." "I know what it means, you arrogant asshole. Just because I'm a general doesn't mean I'm an idiot," shouted the general. "Now tell me where you are in your research and why we can't give this ship back to the aliens. We're willing to go to great lengths to glean whatever information we can from this ship, but we're not willing to risk war with a more advanced civilization. Is your research almost done or not?" "Actually," answered Davidson, "we've barely started. We've confirmed an incredible number of theories just by verifying the existence of this object. We've demonstrated that we can tap into incredible amounts of power by drawing energy from the singularity's electric field. Apparently, we alter the black hole's angular momentum when we do so. Theoretically, we can pump power into it or draw power from it. It's like the perfect energy storage device. For instance, at the rate that this one singularity is spinning, we have access to enough energy to satisfy all of North America's energy requirements for several centuries. If we can have more time to study it, we may be able to figure out how the ship's engines work and how to make more power sources like it. The potential benefits are nearly unimaginable." The general glared. "I'll take that as a no to my question, then." He turned to John. "I want your personnel on their highest alert status. I want all non-essential personnel loaded into transport carriers and ready to evacuate if the aliens show any signs of approaching this facility. I know the superconducting shielding around this lab is supposed to block any detectable emissions, but I won't take any chances. If there's no evidence that they've located us after 2 hours, I'll allow the science teams to return to their work." John saluted and turned to Davidson. "Doctor, please allow me to escort you to the transport carriers," he said, gesturing to the door. The scientist gulped and obediently walked ahead of John. The general looked nervously at his watch and stared angrily at the ship sitting quietly in the lab below. Public reaction to the theft of the alien spacecraft exceeded the outrage of the aliens themselves. Everyone, of course, denied any knowledge of the theft, and the U.S. government was the first to launch a full-scale investigation into its disappearance. As other countries expressed anger and indignation, the search for the thieves became an international priority under the auspices of the United Nations. John's team, however, had not only covered up the evidence of their involvement, they had sprinkled misleading clues that pointed at the Arabs and gotten themselves included in the groups conducting the UN search. John felt that these security features were adequate to conceal their activities for a prolonged period of time, since virtually everyone who knew anything about the program was locked in the facility or under 24-hour observation. While officials worried, the visitors warned that the ship represented an incalculable danger to mankind. They made no threats, but repeated over and over again that the ship had to be returned immediately. Because of John's reassurances, the general allowed Dr. Davidson to return to his research with his team. However, the general demanded daily reports on the research director's progress and reserved the right to cancel the project at any time. Within a day, the scientists reported to John and the general that they'd learned how to fully control the Singularity power source. By using charged electron beams focused on the tiny black hole, we can increase or decrease the Singularity's charge at will, and thus alter the strength of its surrounding magnetic field at will. Currently, we're infusing massive quantities of electrons into the Singularity, and we're getting far more energy out of it than we're putting in, because of the changes to its surrounding magnetic field. The only thing that limits how much power we can get from the thing seems to be the amount of current our cables can carry. What we've learned is spectacular. In most cases, the Singularity behaves opposite from what we expect. We've tabulated enough new information to keep us busy rewriting theories for the next 3 or 4 decades. General Stanbrook smiled. If that's the case then, Doctor, I'll assume we can return the ship to its rightful owners and close the final chapter on this awkward little adventure in scientific research. But, stuttered Davidson, there's still so much more to learn. And what about the power we're generating? The general frowned. I didn't think I'd have to remind you. We're not in the power distribution business, Doctor. If you've gleaned all the knowledge you can from this device, it might be best to initiate the final phase of this project and return the ship to the visitors, while framing the Arabs. The longer we keep it, the less likely we'll be able to pass the blame on to our enemies. We do have a timetable to keep. The scientist grew upset. No, please, General Stanbrook, give us a few more days. There's so much we can still learn. Unfortunately, Doctor, there isn't much time. If we don't get this ship moved soon, our attempt to pin the theft on the Arabs will be exposed, and we'll have to face the wrath of the visitors on our own. Now, I can't guess whether their punishment will include incarceration, execution, or some form of creative vivisection, but I'm sure your imagination is sufficient to conjure up what they might personally do to you if you get caught with your hand in their cookie jar. The doctor gulped loudly, and the general snorted in disgust. You have 2 days, Dr. Davidson, said General Stanbrook. Then Colonel Martin will relocate the ship as planned. Do you understand? Davidson nodded lightly and backed out of the room. Later that night, after dinner, General Stanbrook was summoned to Davidson's lab. As he approached, the lead researcher who had been talking to his staff turned to the general and paused, speechless, his face pale as a ghost. It's gone, said Davidson. The general looked about and frowned. He studied the ship briefly and said, What do you mean it's gone? The power supply, said the doctor. It's gone. Apparently its power wasn't unlimited after all. 1 second we were pumping power into it, and the next second it evaporated and disappeared. His disappointment was obvious. "I notified Colonel Martin that the ship is his now." "I just thought you should know." The general nodded and said, "Thank you, Dr. Davidson. We'll take it from here." The transport of the ship to the specifically prepared lab in the deserts of Iran went as perfectly as its original abduction. Some carefully planted evidence led the UN teams and the aliens to its location within hours of its arrival. The Arabs steadfastly denied their involvement, but their enmity toward the aliens was well known, and no one expected anything less. General Stanbrook and his team watched the television crews as a single alien ship descended on the Arab outpost. A solitary visitor, their first ambassador, entered the lab, inspected the ship, and then left. Within minutes, all the other visitors around the world stopped whatever they were doing, returned to their own vessels, and left the Earth. By the time the first ambassador reached the UN, all his companions were gone. His ship descended to the plaza outside the UN building in New York, and the first ambassador stood on the ramp of his ship and began to speak. "We have enjoyed our stay on your world, but we must leave now. Your world reminds us of the one we once lived on. That is why we came, and why we kept coming back. You sought our knowledge, but we would not share it with you because you did not have the wisdom to use it. Your species thinks that knowledge is power. It is not. Knowledge is dangerous, and a little knowledge can kill. We have never offered explanations about ourselves before, because this belief is so strong in our society, because of our past. We have seen entire worlds destroyed because its inhabitants possessed knowledge that they were not ready for. Our reticence was deliberate, for we wanted to prevent such a disaster from happening again. Unfortunately, we failed." "What do you mean?" shouted a reporter. "As you know, we have never answered your questions before. But this time, we will explain, because our secrets no longer matter. I will answer you, then I will leave with my brethren, and we will never return. The power sources within our ships are based upon small black holes, tiny, highly charged singularities, from which we can draw tremendous amounts of energy. They power our ships and enable us to travel faster than the speed of light. Unfortunately, whoever stole our missing ship apparently tampered with its power supply. We suspect that they misunderstood its nature and attempted to increase its output by altering its charge and pumping massive quantities of electrons into it. What they failed to recognize, what they did not know, was that the singularities are made of antimatter. By injecting electrons into the black hole, the negative charges of the electrons canceled out the positrons inside the singularity. Eventually, it transitioned from having a strong positive charge to a negative one. But in that brief interval, it escaped the containment fields that held it in place. Because of its great density, it would have fallen through the mantle of your planet like an iron pellet through mist, and it now orbits your Earth far below ground level, like a microscopic moon. Despite failsafes built into our ships, the tampering of your species has released the singularity. Because it is so small, it will have no significant effect for some time. For the near future, it will continue circling your planet beneath its surface and only absorb a few kilograms of mass a day. Since the singularity is made of antimatter, its mass will actually decrease with each passage through your planet, and its diameter will decrease exponentially. However, the energy for the annihilation of the singularity core will increase, but will be contained by the event horizon surrounding it. Normal matter crossing the event horizon of the singularity will be converted directly into energy, and the singularity's mass will continue to decrease even as the energy that it contains increases. Soon, the core will grow so small that no technology on your world or ours will be able to detect it, and its orbit will grow smaller and smaller until it comes to rest at your planet's core. By that time, its likelihood of interacting with matter will be almost zero. There will be no noticeable effects for decades. However, when the atomic-sized black hole finally absorbs enough matter to cancel out all the antimatter within it, the gravitational forces that form its event horizon will disappear. Without sufficient mass, the black hole will cease to exist. When that happens, however, all the energy that was created by the annihilation of many tons of antimatter with normal matter will be released. The end will be quite quick. For a brief, spectacular moment, the energy released by that subterranean explosion will outshine your sun. The blast will sunder your planet with sufficient force that it will displace the orbits of the other worlds in your solar system. Everyone began shouting. The visitor raised its hands to quell the crowd. We understand your situation. Thousands of years ago, when we were first venturing into space, our own world was destroyed in this same way. Only a few of us escaped. If you wish it, we will return before the end comes to preserve a few members of your race. We will leave that selection to you. Shouting amongst those people assembled grew chaotic. I am sorry, said the first ambassador. Not even our technology can change this fate. You only have yourselves to blame. With that, the visitor turned and retreated up the ramp and disappeared back into his ship. Pandemonium reigned, and everyone began screaming at once. The visitor, however, ignored them all. Before anyone could intervene, the portal to his ship closed, and it rose effortlessly into the sky. In seconds, it was gone. While some governments, including the US, tried to suppress the visitor's farewell speech, too many people had recorded it, and soon the whole world knew of it. Suspicions turned into blame. In hours, wars broke out, and lesser nations, feeling there was nothing left to lose, decided it was time to finally settle grudges with others. John Martin went AWOL and drove home to his wife. General Stanbrook took his service revolver and settled accounts with Dr. Davidson before turning it on himself. While the actual climax of their failure would not manifest itself for decades, it appeared that the world was destroying itself ahead of schedule. As fighting continued and grew, powerful telescopes around the world showed that the visitors had assembled high above the Earth to patiently wait and watch the final show. Thank you for listening. If you loved what you heard, please like and subscribe to Untold Tales on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Now, you know that we love our listeners, fans, and patrons, and we know that you love us too. So I'd like to invite you personally to join the Real Space Insiders community on Patreon. You'll get behind-the-scenes content, digital downloads, early access to content coming out, including events whenever we have them, and patron shoutouts. And you aren't tied into any commitment, so you can stay and go whenever you'd like. If you'd like to read more of the stories on the Untold Tales series not narrated here on our podcast, you can find Jeff's books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. So those links are all in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful day.